Chapter 20 of The Woman of Mystery. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Woman of Mystery by Maurice LEBLANC. Chapter 20. The Death Penalty and a Capital Punishment. The Comtesse Hermine started up triumphantly, and this movement of hers was even more dramatic than the inexplicable vibration of that electric bell. She gave a cry of fierce delight, followed by an outburst of laughter. The whole expression of her face changed. It denoted no more anxiety, no more of that tension indicating a groping and bewildered mind, nothing but insolence, assurance, scorn and intense pride. "Fools!" she snarled. "Fools! So you really believed, oh, what simpletons you Frenchmen are, that you had me caught like a rat in a trap! Me! Me!" The words rushed forth so volubly, so hurriedly, that her utterance was impeded. She became rigid, closing her eyes for a moment. Then, summoning up a great effort of will, she put out her right arm, pushed aside a chair and uncovered a little mahogany slab with a brass switch, for which she felt with her hand, while her eyes remained turned on Paul, on the Comte d'Andeville, on his son and on the three officers. And in a dry, cutting voice, she rapped out: "What have I to fear from you now? You wish to know if I am the Countess von Hohenzollern? Yes, I am. I don't deny it. I even proclaim the fact. The actions which you in your stupid way call murders, yes, I committed them all. It was my duty to the Emperor, to the Greater Germany. A spy? Not at all. Simply a German woman. And what a German woman does for her country is rightly done. So let us have no more silly phrases, no more babbling about the past. Nothing matters but the present and the future. And I am once more mistress of the present and the future both. Thanks to you, I am resuming the direction of events, and we shall have some amusement. Shall I tell you something? All that has happened here during the past few days was prepared by myself. The bridges carried away by the river were sapped at their foundations by my orders. Why? For the trivial purpose of making you fall back? No doubt that was necessary first. We had to announce a victory. Victory or not, it shall be announced. And it will have its effect, that I promise you. But I wanted something better, and I have succeeded." She stopped and then, leaning her body towards her hearers, continued in a lower voice: "The retreat, the disorder among your troops, the need of opposing our advance and bringing up reinforcements must needs compel your commander-in-chief to come here and take counsel with his generals. For months past I have been lying in wait for him. It was impossible for me to get within reach of him. So what was I to do? Why, of course, as I couldn't go to him, I must make him come to me and lure him to a place chosen by myself where I had made all my arrangements. Well, he has come. My arrangements are made, and I have only to act. I have only to act. He is here, in a room at the little villa which he occupies whenever he comes to Soissons. He is there, I know it. I was waiting for the signal which one of my men was to give me. You have heard the signal yourselves, so there is no doubt about it. The man whom I want is at this moment deliberating with his generals in a house which I know and which I have had mined. He has with him a general commanding an army and another general, the commander of an army corps. Both are of the ablest. There are 3 of them, not to speak of their subordinates. And I have only to make a movement, understand what I say, a single movement. I have only to touch this lever to blow them all up, together with the house in which they are. Am I to make that movement?" There was a sharp click. Bernard d'Andeville had cocked his revolver. "We must kill the beast!" he cried. Paul rushed at him, shouting: "Hold your tongue! And don't move a finger!" The Countess began laughing again, and her laugh was full of wicked glee. "You're right, Paul Delroze, my man. You take in the situation, you do. However quickly that young booby may fire his bullet at me, I shall always have time to pull the lever. And that's what you don't want, isn't it? That's what these other gentlemen and you want to avoid at all costs, even at the cost of my liberty, eh? For that is how the matter stands, alas. All my fine plan is falling to pieces because I am in your hands. But I alone am worth as much as your 3 great generals, am I not? And I have every right to spare them in order to save myself. So are we agreed? Their lives against mine, and at once. Paul Delroze, I give you 1 minute in which to consult your friends. If in 1 minute, speaking in their name and your own, you do not give me your word of honor that you consider me free and that I shall receive every facility for crossing the Swiss frontier, then, hey-ho, up we go, as the children say. Oh, how I've got you, all of you, and the humor of it. Hurry up, friend Delroze, your word. Yes, that's all I ask. Hang it, the word of a French officer. Ha, 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 ha." Her nervous, scornful laugh went on ringing through the dead silence, and it happened gradually that its tone rang less surely, like words that fail to produce the intended effect. It rang false, broke, and suddenly ceased. And she stood in dumb amazement. Paul Delroze had not budged, nor had any of the officers nor any of the soldiers in the room. She shook her fist at them. "You're to hurry, do you hear? You have 1 minute, my French friends, 1 minute and no more." Not a man moved. She counted the seconds in a low voice and announced them aloud by tens. At the 40th second she stopped with an anxious look on her face. Those present were as motionless as before. Then she yielded to a fit of fury. "Why, you must be mad!" she cried. "Don't you understand? Oh, perhaps you don't believe me. Yes, that's it. They don't believe me. They can't imagine that it's possible. Possible? Why, it's your own soldiers who worked for me. Yes, by laying telephone lines between the post office and the villa used for headquarters. My assistants had only to tap the wires, and the thing was done. The mine chamber under the villa was connected with this cellar. Do you believe me now?" Her hoarse, panting voice ceased. Her misgivings, which had become more and more marked, distorted her features. Why did none of these men move? Why did they pay no attention to her orders? Had they taken the incredible resolution to accept whatever happened, rather than show her mercy? "Look here," she said, "you understand me, surely? Or else you have all gone mad. Come, think of it. Your generals, the effect which their death would cause, the tremendous impression of our power which it would give, and the confusion that would follow, the retreat of your troops, the disorganization of your staff. Come, come." It seemed as if she was trying to convince them, nay, more, as if she was beseeching them to look at things from her point of view and to admit the consequence which she had attributed to her action. For her plan to succeed, it was essential that they should consent to act logically. Otherwise. Suddenly she seemed to recoil against the humiliating sort of supplication to which she had been stooping. Resuming her threatening attitude, she cried: "So much the worse for them! So much the worse for them! It will be you who have condemned them. So you insist upon it? We are quite agreed? And then I suppose you think you've got me. Come, come now, even if you show yourselves pig-headed, the Comtesse Hermine has not said her last word. You don't know the Comtesse Hermine. The Comtesse Hermine never surrenders." She was possessed by a sort of frenzy and was horrible to look at. Twisting and writhing with rage, hideous of face, aged by fully 20 years, she suggested the picture of a devil burning in the flames of hell. She cursed, she blasphemed, she gave vent to a string of oaths. She even laughed at the thought of a catastrophe which her next movement would produce. And she spluttered: "All right, it's you who are the executioners. Oh, what folly! So you will have it so? But they must be mad. Look at them calmly sacrificing their generals, their commander-in-chief, in their stupid obstinacy. Well, so much the worse for them. You have insisted on it. I hold you responsible. A word from you, a single word." She had a last moment of hesitation. With a fierce and unyielding face, she stared at those stubborn men who seemed to be obeying an implacable command. Not one of them budged. Then it seemed as if, at the moment of taking the fatal decision, she was overcome with such an outburst of voluptuous wickedness that it made her forget the horror of her own position. She simply said: "May God's will be done and my emperor gain the victory." Stiffening her body, her eyes staring before her, she touched the switch with her finger. The effect was almost immediate. Through the outer air, through the vaulted roof, the sound of the explosion reached the cellar. The ground seemed to shake as though the vibration had spread through the bowels of the earth. Then came silence. The Comtesse Hermine listened for a few seconds longer. Her face was radiant with joy. She repeated, "So that my Emperor may gain the victory." And suddenly, bringing her arm down to her side, she thrust herself backwards among the skirts and blouses against which she was leaning, and seemed actually to sink into the wall and disappear from sight. A heavy door closed with a bang, and almost at the same moment a shot rang through the cellar. Bernard had fired at the row of clothes, and he was rushing towards the hidden door when Paul collared him and held him where he stood. Bernard struggled in Paul's grasp. "But she's escaping us. Why can't you let me go after her? Look here, surely you remember the Èbrecourt tunnel and the system of electric wires. This is the same thing exactly. And here she is getting away." He could not understand Paul's conduct, and his sister was as indignant as himself. Here was the foul creature who had killed their mother, who had stolen their mother's name and place, and they were allowing her to escape. "Paul," she cried, "Paul, you must go after her. You must make an end of her. Paul, you can't forget all that she has done." Élisabeth did not forget. She remembered the Château d'Ornequin and Prince Conrad's villa, and the evening when she had been compelled to toss down a bumper of champagne, and the bargain enforced upon her, and all the shame and torture to which she had been put. But Paul paid no attention to either the brother or the sister, nor did the officers and soldiers. All observed the same rigidly impassive attitude, seemed unaffected by what was happening. 2 or 3 minutes passed, during which a few words were exchanged in whispers, while not a soul stirred. Broken down and shattered with excitement, Élisabeth wept. Bernard's flesh crept at the sound of his sister's sobs, and he felt as if he were suffering one of those nightmares in which we witness the most horrible sights without having the strength or the power to act. And then something happened which everybody except Bernard and Élisabeth seemed to think quite natural. There was a grating sound behind the row of clothes. The invisible door moved on its hinges. The clothes parted and made way for a human form, which was flung on the ground like a bundle. Bernard d'Andeville uttered an exclamation of delight. Élisabeth looked and laughed through her tears. It was the Comtesse Hermine, bound and gagged. 3 gendarmes entered after her. "We've delivered the goods, sir," one of them jested, with a fat, jolly chuckle. "We were beginning to get a bit nervous and to wonder if you'd guessed right and if this was really the way she meant to clear out by. But by Jove, sir, the baggage gave us some work to do. A proper hell-cat. She struggled and bit like a badger. And the way she yelled! Oh, the vixen!" And to the soldiers, who were in fits of laughter, "Mates, this bit of game was just what we wanted to finish off our day's hunting. It's a grand bag, and Lieutenant Delroze scented the trail finely. There's a picture for you! A whole gang of Boches in one day. Look out, sir! What are you doing? Mind the beast's fangs!" Paul was stooping over the spy. He loosened her gag, which seemed to be hurting her. She at once tried to call out, but succeeded only in uttering stifled and incoherent syllables. Nevertheless, Paul was able to make out a few words, against which he protested. "No," he said, "not even that to console you. The game is lost. And that's the worst punishment of all, isn't it? To die without having done the harm you meant to do. And such harm, too." He rose and went up to the group of officers. The 3, having fulfilled their functions as judges, were talking together, and one of them said to Paul, "Well played, Delroze. My best congratulations." "Thank you, sir. I would have prevented this attempt to escape, but I wanted to heap up every possible proof against the woman, and not only to accuse her of the crimes which she has committed, but to show her to you in the act of committing crime." "Aye, and there's nothing half-hearted about the vixen. But for you, Delroze, the villa would have blown up with all my staff and myself into the bargain. But what was the explosion which we heard?" "A condemned building, sir, which had already been demolished by the shells and which the commandant of the fortress wanted to get rid of. We only had to divert the electric wire which starts from here." "So the whole gang is captured?" "Yes, sir, thanks to the spy whom I had the luck to lay my hands on just now, and who told me what I had to do in order to get in here. He had first revealed the Comtesse Hermine's plan in full detail, together with the names of all his accomplices. It was arranged that the man was to let the Countess know, at 10 o'clock this evening, by means of that electric bell, if you were holding a council in your villa. The notice was given, but by one of our own soldiers, acting under my orders." "Well done, and once more thank you, Delroze." The general stepped into the circle of light. He was tall and powerfully built. His upper lip was covered with a thick white moustache. There was a movement of surprise among those present. Bernard d'Andeville and his sister came forward. The soldiers stood to attention. They had recognized the general commanding in chief. With him were the two generals of whom the countess had spoken. The gendarmes had pushed the spy against the wall opposite. They untied her legs, but had to support her because her knees were giving way beneath her. And her face expressed unspeakable amazement, even more than terror. With wide open eyes she stared at the man whom she had meant to kill, the man whom she believed to be dead and who was alive, and who would shortly pronounce the inevitable sentence of death upon her. Paul repeated: "To die without having done the harm you intended to do. That is the really terrible thing, is it not?" The commander-in-chief was alive. The hideous and tremendous plot had failed. He was alive, and so were his officers, and so was every one of the spy's enemies: Paul Delroze, Stéphane d'Andeville, Bernard, Élisabeth, those whom she had pursued with her indefatigable hatred. They were all there. She was about to die, gazing at the vision, so horrible for her, of her enemies reunited and happy. And above all, she was about to die with the thought that everything was lost. Her great dream was shattered to pieces. Her emperor's throne was tottering. The very soul of the Hohenzollerns was departing with the Comtesse Hermine. And all this was plainly visible in her haggard eyes, from which gleams of madness flashed at intervals. The general said to one of those with him: "Have you given the order? Are they shooting the lot?" "Yes, this evening, sir." "Very well, we'll begin with this woman and at once. Here, where we are." The spy gave a start. With a distortion of all her features, she succeeded in shifting her gag. And they heard her beseeching for mercy in a torrent of words and moans. "Let us go," said the commander-in-chief. He felt two burning hands press his own. Élisabeth was leaning towards him and entreating him with tears. Paul introduced his wife. The general said gently: "I see that you feel pity, madame, in spite of all that you have gone through. But you must have no pity, madame. Of course it is the pity which we cannot help feeling for those about to die. But we must have no pity for these people or for members of their race. They have placed themselves beyond the pale of mankind, and we must never forget it. When you are a mother, madame, you will teach your children a feeling to which France was a stranger and which will prove a safeguard in the future: hatred of the Huns." He took her by the arm in a friendly fashion and led her towards the door. "Allow me to see you out. Are you coming, Delroze? You must need rest after such a day's work." They went out. The spy was shrieking: "Mercy! Mercy!" The soldiers were already drawn up in a line against the opposite wall. The Count, Paul and Bernard waited for a moment. She had killed the Comte d'Andeville's wife. She had killed Bernard's mother and Paul's father. She had tortured Élisabeth. And, though their minds were troubled, they felt the great calm which the sense of justice gives. No hatred stirred them. No thought of vengeance excited them. The gendarmes had fastened the spy by the waistband to a nail in the wall to hold her up. They now stood aside. Paul said to her: "One of the soldiers here is a priest, if you need his assistance." But she did not understand. She did not listen. She merely saw what was happening and what was about to happen. And she stammered without ceasing: "Mercy! Mercy! Mercy!" They went out. When they came to the top of the staircase, a word of command reached their ears: "Present!" Lest he should hear more, Paul slammed the inner and outer hall doors behind him. Outside was the open air. the good pure air with which men love to fill their lungs. Troops were marching along, singing as they went. Paul and Bernard learnt that the battle was over and our positions definitely assured. Here also the Comtesse Hermine had failed. A few days later, at the Château d'Ornequin, Second Lieutenant Bernard d'Andeville, accompanied by 12 men, entered the casemate, well warmed and well ventilated, which served as a prison for Prince Conrad. On the table were some bottles and the remains of an ample repast. The prince lay sleeping on a bed against the wall. Bernard tapped him on the shoulder. "Courage, sir." The prince sprang up, terrified. "Eh? What's that?" "I said, 'Courage, sir. The hour has come.'" Pale as death, the prince stammered. "Courage? Courage? I don't understand. Oh, Lord, is it possible?" "Everything is always possible," said Bernard, "and what has to happen always happens, especially calamities." And he suggested, "A glass of rum, sir, to pull you together? A cigarette?" Oh, Lord," the prince repeated, trembling like a leaf. Mechanically, he took the cigarette offered him, but it fell from his lips after the first few puffs. Oh, Lord," he never ceased stammering. And his distress increased when he saw the 12 men waiting with their rifles at rest. He wore the distraught look of the condemned man who beholds the outline of the guillotine in the pale light of the dawn. They had to carry him to the terrace, in front of a strip of broken wall. "Sit down, sir," said Bernard. Even without this invitation, the wretched man would have been incapable of standing on his feet. He sank upon a stone. The 12 soldiers took up their position facing him. He bent his head so as not to see, and his whole body jerked like that of a dancing doll when you pull its strings. A moment passed, and Bernard asked in a kind and friendly tone, "Would you rather have it front or back?" The prince, utterly overwhelmed, did not reply, and Bernard exclaimed, "I'm afraid you're not very well, sir. Come, your Royal Highness must pull yourself together. You have lots of time. Lieutenant Delroze won't be here for another 10 minutes. He was very keen on being present at this, how shall I put it, at this little ceremony. And really he will be disappointed in your appearance. You're green in the face, sir." Still displaying the greatest interest and as though seeking to divert the prince's thoughts, he said, "What can I tell you, sir, by way of news? You know that your friend the Comtesse Hermine is dead, I suppose?" "Ha, ha! That makes you prick up your ears, I see. It's quite true. That good and great woman was executed the other day at Soissons. And upon my word, she cut just as poor a figure as you are doing now, sir. They had to hold her up. And the way she yelled and screamed for mercy! There was no pose about her, no dignity. But I can see that your thoughts are straying. Bother! What can I do to cheer you up? Ah, I have an idea." He took a little paper-bound book from his pocket. "Look here, sir, I'll read to you. Of course, a Bible would be more appropriate, only I haven't one on me. And the great thing, after all, is to help you to forget. And I know nothing better for a German who prides himself on his country and his army than this little book. We'll dip into it together, shall we? It's called German Crimes as Related by German Eyewitnesses. It consists of extracts from the diaries of your fellow countrymen. It is therefore one of those irrefutable documents which earn the respect of German science. I'll open it at random. Here goes. The inhabitants fled from the village. It was a horrible sight. All the houses were plastered with blood, and the faces of the dead were hideous to see. We buried them all at once. There were 60 of them, including a number of old women, some old men, a woman about to become a mother, and 3 children who had pressed themselves against one another and died like that. All the survivors were turned out, and I saw 4 little boys carrying on 2 sticks a cradle with a child of 5 or 6 months in it. The whole village was sacked. And I also saw a mother with 2 babies, and one of them had a great wound in the head and had lost an eye." Bernard stopped to address the prince. "Interesting reading, is it not, sir?" And he went on. 26 August. The charming village of Gué d'Ossus in the Ardennes has been burnt to the ground, though quite innocent, as it seems to me. They tell me that a cyclist fell from his machine and that the fall made his rifle go off of its own accord, so they fired in his direction. After that they simply threw the male inhabitants into the flames. Here's another bit. 25 August. This was in Belgium. We have shot 300 of the inhabitants of the town. Those who survived the volleys were told off to bury the rest. You should have seen the women's faces." And the reading continued, interrupted by judicious reflections which Bernard emitted in a placid voice, as though he were commenting on an historical work. Prince Conrad, meanwhile, seemed on the verge of fainting. When Paul arrived at the Château d'Ornequin and, alighting from his car, went to the terrace, the sight of the prince and the careful stage setting with the 12 soldiers told him of the rather uncanny little comedy which Bernard was playing. He uttered a reproachful protest. "I say, Bernard!" The young man exclaimed in an innocent voice, "Ah, Paul, so you've come! Quick, His Royal Highness and I were waiting for you. We shall be able to finish off this job at last." He went and stood in front of his men at 10 paces from the prince. "Are you ready, sir? Ah, I see you prefer it front way. Very well, though I can't say that you're very attractive seen from the front. However, oh, but look here, this will never do. Don't bend your legs like that, I beg of you. Hold yourself up, do. And please look pleasant. Now then, keep your eyes on my cap. I'm counting. 1, 2. Look pleasant, can't you?" He had lowered his head and was holding a pocket camera against his chest. Presently he squeezed the bulb, the camera clicked and Bernard exclaimed, "There, I've got you. Sir, I don't know how to thank you. You have been so kind, so patient." The smile was a little forced, perhaps, like the smile of a man on his way to the gallows, and the eyes were like the eyes of a corpse. Otherwise the expression was quite charming. "1,000 thanks." Paul could not help laughing. Prince Conrad had not fully grasped the joke. However, he felt that the danger was past and he was now trying to put a good face on things, like a gentleman accustomed to bear any sort of misfortune with dignified contempt. Paul said, "You are free, sir. I have an appointment with one of the Emperor's aides-de-camp on the frontier at 3 o'clock today. He is bringing 20 French prisoners and I am to hand your Royal Highness over to him in exchange. Pray step into the car." Prince Conrad obviously did not grasp a word of what Paul was saying. The appointment on the frontier, the 20 prisoners and the rest were just so many phrases which failed to make any impression on his bewildered brain. But when he had taken his seat and when the motor car drove slowly round the lawn, he saw something that completed his discomfiture. Élisabeth stood on the grass and made him a smiling courtesy. It was an obvious hallucination. He rubbed his eyes with a flabbergasted air which so clearly indicated what was in his mind that Bernard said, "Make no mistake, sir, it's my sister all right. Yes, Paul Delroze and I thought we had better go and fetch her in Germany. So we turned up your Baedeker, asked for an interview with the Emperor, and it was His Majesty himself who, with his usual good grace— Oh, by the way, sir, you must expect to receive a wigging from the governor. His Majesty is simply furious with you. Such a scandal, you know. Behaving like a rotter, you know. You're in for a bad time, sir." The exchange took place at the hour named. The 20 prisoners were handed over. Paul Delroze took the aide-de-camp aside. "Sir," he said, "you will please tell the Emperor that the Countess Hermine von Hohenzollern made an attempt to assassinate the commander-in-chief. She was arrested by me, tried by court-martial and sentenced and has been shot by the commander-in-chief's orders. I am in possession of a certain number of her papers, especially private letters to which I have no doubt that the Emperor himself attaches the greatest importance. They will be returned to His Majesty on the day when the Château d'Ornequin recovers all its furniture, pictures and other valuables. I wish you good day, sir." It was over. Paul had won all along the line. He had delivered Élisabeth and revenged his father's death. He had destroyed the head of the German Secret Service and, by insisting on the release of the 20 French prisoners, kept all the promises which he had made to the General Commanding in Chief. He had every right to be proud of his work. On the way back, Bernard asked, "So I shocked you just now?" "You more than shocked me," said Paul, laughing. "You made me feel indignant." "Indignant? Really? Indignant, quotha! Here's a young bounder who tries to take your wife from you, and who's let off with a few days' solitary confinement. Here's one of the leaders of those highwaymen who go about committing murder and pillage, and he goes home free to start pillaging and murdering again. Why, it's absurd! Just think, all those scoundrels who wanted war, emperors and princes and emperors and princes' wives, know nothing of war but its pomp and its tragic beauty, and absolutely nothing of the agony that falls upon humbler people. They suffer morally in the dread of the punishment that awaits them, but not physically, in their flesh and in the flesh of their flesh. The others die, they go on living. And when I have this unparalleled opportunity of getting hold of one of them, when I might take revenge on him and his confederates and shoot him in cold blood as they shoot our sisters and our wives, you think it out of the way that I should put the fear of death into him for just 10 minutes? Why, if I had listened to sound, human and logical justice, I ought to have visited him with some trifling torture which he would never have forgotten, such as cutting off one of the ears or the tip of his nose." "You are perfectly right," said Paul. "There, you see, you agree with me. I should have cut off the tip of his nose. What a fool I was not to do it, instead of resting content with giving him a wretched lesson which he will have forgotten by tomorrow. What an ass I am! However, my one consolation is that I have taken a photograph which will constitute a priceless document, the face of a Hohenzollern in the presence of death. Oh, I ask you, did you see his face?" The car was passing through Ornate village. It was deserted. The Huns had burnt down every house and taken away all the inhabitants, driving them before them like troops of slaves. But they saw, seated amid the ruins, a man in rags. He was an old man. He stared at them foolishly with a madman's eyes. Beside him a child was holding forth its arms. Poor little arms from which the hands were gone. End of chapter 20. End of The Woman of Mystery by Maurice LEBLANC.